Hello everyone and welcome to Unit 3 on Subjectivity. So we had been discussing about the materialistic account of mind, and now we are continuing to discuss the non-materialistic aspects of mind. When we discuss about the subjectivity aspects of mind, there are the terms qualia and epiphenomenal qualia that keeps ringing. Let's see what is the basic distinction between these two terms. Epiphenomenal qualia and qualia are closely related concepts in philosophy of mind, but there are key distinctions between them, particularly in how they relate to causality and consciousness. Understanding these distinctions also helps explain Frank Jackson's Mary, What Mary Did Not Know thought experiment and the broader philosophical insights that arise from it, especially regarding non-materialistic theories of consciousness. Now, the question is, what are qualia? Qualia are the subjective, phenomenal aspects of conscious experience, what it feels like to experience something. For example, the redness of tomato, the taste of chocolate, or the sound of a bell. Qualia represents the what it is like aspects of experiences, which is fundamentally subjective and first person. Each person's experience of qualia is private and unique. Philosophically, qualia pose a problem for physicalism. They believe that everything, including consciousness, can be explained by physical facts because they seem to represent something that cannot be fully captured by physical descriptions of the brain. Then the further questions that comes up is, what are epiphenomenal qualia? Epiphenomenal qualia refer to the idea that qualia exist as non-physical properties of consciousness, but they are causally inert, meaning they do not affect or influence the physical world. In this view, while we have subjective experiences, qualia, these experiences do not cause any physical actions or changes. Instead, they are byproducts, epiphenomena of physical processes in the brain. The notion of epiphenomenal qualia is part of a broader position called epiphenomenalism, which suggests that while the brain produces conscious experiences, these experiences do not influence the brain or behavior. Physical events like neurons firing cause both physical reactions, speaking or moving, and the experience of qualia, but qualia themselves do not cause anything in return. So, what are the basic distinctions? Qualia in general, some theories of qualia, particularly non-phenomenalist ones, hold that qualia are causally active. For instance, the experience of pain may lead you to withdraw your hand from a hot surface. Epiphenomenal qualia. In contrast, epiphenomenal qualia are said to have no causal role. They arise as a consequence of brain activity but do not influence behavior or any physical processes. In this view, the experience of pain might still be felt, but the withdrawal of the hand would be entirely due to neural processes, not the subjective experience itself. If we further review, we see that in reviewing the literature of qualia and epiphenomenal qualia, key distinctions emerge regarding their nature and impact in philosophical discourse. Qualia refers to the subjective, phenomenal aspects of experience, like the redness of an apple or the pain of a headache. These are seen as intrinsic, private, and ineffable mental properties that characterize consciousness. In contrast, phenomenal qualia, not epiphenomenal, are understood to have causal effects on physical events. This distinction has sparked debate because epiphenomenalism creates a puzzling scenario. If qualia are causally inert, how do we know about them? Some argue that it challenges the very existence of qualia, as knowing and discussing them seem to imply causal efficacy. Now, at this juncture, we should pick up some thought experiment, and today we are going ahead with Jackson's knowledge argument when we are discussing qualia and epiphenomenal qualia. So this very argument is a part of his broader critique of physicalism, which suggests that Mary, a scientist who knows all the physical facts about color but has never seen red, would gain new knowledge upon experiencing redness for the first time, implying that some knowledge about qualia escapes the physical description of the world. However, this argument has faced criticism, notably from those who argue that physicalism can still account for Mary's new experience without postulating non-physical properties. Recent evaluations like the 2016 study, The Qualifications or Lack Thereof of Epiphenomenal Qualia, argue that labeling qualia as epiphenomenal undermines the philosophical and scientific study of consciousness by reducing the significance of these experiences. This critique emphasizes that epiphenomenalism may lead to an under-appreciation of the role qualia play in human cognition, warning against oversimplifying complex mental phenomena to fit current physicalist paradigms. Thus, the key philosophical insights revolve around whether qualia have a role in influencing physical states or are merely passive, and how this distinction challenges the boundaries of physicalism. The divergence centers on the causal efficacy of qualia, while the convergence lies in the acknowledgement that subjective experiences are real, even if their metaphysical status remains contentious. Frank Jackson's What Mary Didn't Know is a key thought experiment in the philosophy of mind, primarily aimed at challenging physicalism. The idea that everything, including consciousness, can be fully explained in physical terms. The thought experiment supports properly dualism, the view that there are non-physical properties of mind that cannot be captured by physical science. So when we look at the summary of Jackson's What Mary Didn't Know, we see that the experiment introduces Mary, a brilliant scientist who knows everything about color vision from a physical and scientific standpoint, but has only ever lived in a black and white room. Upon experiencing the color red for the first time, she gains new knowledge, the subjective experience of qualia of red. Jackson uses this to argue that physicalism is incomplete as it fails to account for these subjective experiences. Mary's case suggests that no amount of knowledge about the physical workings of color perceptions, that is, neural pathways, wavelengths of light, can convey the qualitative subjective experience of actually seeing a color. Qualia and physicalism. Jackson argues that Mary learned something new, proving that qualia, subjective experiences, are non-physical. This is often referred to as the knowledge argument, which holds that physical descriptions cannot fully capture the nature of consciousness. Epiphenomenalism. Jackson later adds that qualia are possibly epiphenomenal, meaning that while they are real and non-physical, they do not cause any physical effects. This view limits the causal role of qualia but underscores their distinctiveness from physical facts. Materialism with flexibility. Functionalism is compatible with materialism as it assumes that mental states are realized by physical processes. However, it emphasizes the function of role of these states rather than their physical makeup. What matters is not the specific material, but the way that material realizes mental functions. Now, in contrast to Frank Jackson, we will also be picking up yet another experiment which is entitled as Thomas Nagel's What It Is Like to Be a Bat. These two thought experiments, Frank Jackson's and Thomas Nagel's, speaks volume about the non-materialistic account of mind vis-a-vis the qualia. Thomas Nagel's famous 1974 paper, What It Is Like to Be a Bat, addresses a similar concern about the subjective nature of consciousness. Nagel argues that there is something irreducibly subjective about consciousness, what it is like to be a certain organism or to experience the world as that organism. This idea of what it is like emphasizes the difficulty of translating subjective experiences into objective physical terms. While both Jackson and Nagel challenge physicalism, they approach it from different angles. Jackson's approach focuses on the incompleteness of physical information when it comes to subjective experience. He uses a thought experiment to demonstrate that gaining experience adds knowledge that cannot be derived from physical facts alone. Nagel's approach, the bat thought experiment, highlights the fundamentally subjective nature of experience, arguing that no objective account of an organism's physical structure, like a bat's sonar perception, can fully explain what it is like for that organism to experience the world. This stresses the limits of objectivity in explaining consciousness. Convergence. Both Jackson and Nagel emphasizes that physicalism is inadequate in explaining subjective experience. They argue that the subjective qualitative aspect of consciousness, qualia, cannot be reduced to physical terms. Both highlight that knowledge of physical processes, be it color vision or bat echolocation, does not provide access to the inner experience of those processes. Divergence. Jackson focuses on the epistemic gap between physical knowledge and qualia. His argument is framed as a challenge to the completeness of physical knowledge, particularly through the lens of the knowledge argument. Divergence. Nagel, on the other hand, focuses on the ontological gap, the idea that some aspects of consciousness are inherently subjective and cannot be fully captured by objective science. Nagel does not frame this as an epistemic issue, but rather as a limitation of objectivity in understanding subjective experience. Jackson's experiment uses a human example, Mary's color vision, to illustrate the epistemic gap, while Nagel uses a non-human example, the bat's experience, to explore the limits of objectivity in explaining consciousness. Jackson challenges the idea that knowing all the physical facts about a phenomena, such as vision, can give us knowledge of its subjective qualities. His argument is frequently cited in discussions of property dualism, where mental properties are distinct from but dependent on physical properties. Nagel introduces a more fundamental concern about subjectivity in consciousness, suggesting that science, which aims for objective explanations, may never fully account for the subjective nature of experience. His insights have implications for debates on consciousness and the limits of scientific understanding. In conclusion, while Jackson focuses on the epistemological limitations of physicalism, the explaining of consciousness via the Mary thought experiment, Nagel highlights the ontological limitations of objectivity in grasping subjective experience through the bat analogy. Both philosophers, however, agree that consciousness involves more than just physical processes, with subjective experience playing a crucial role that resists physicalist explanations. Frank Jackson's What Mary Did Not Know thought experiment is thus directly connected to the idea of qualia and offers a defense of epiphenomenal qualia. Mary, as we understand by now, is a scientist who knows everything there is to know about the physical facts of color, vision, the wavelengths of light, the functioning of the retina, and the neural processes of color, but has lived her whole life in a black and white room. The question posed by Jackson is, when Mary leaves the room and sees the color red for the first time, does she learn something new? Jackson argues that she does, which shows that not all knowledge is physical knowledge. The new thing Mary learns is the quality of red, what it is like to experience the color red. In Jackson's view, qualia like the experience of redness, are epiphenomenal, which is their non-physical nature of qualia. Even though Mary knew all the physical facts about color vision, she didn't know what it was like to experience red. This suggests that qualia are non-physical and cannot be fully captured by physical information alone. Jackson proposes that these qualia are epiphenomenal. They arise from physical processes in the brain, but they do not affect the physical world. When Mary experiences red for the first time, her experience does not influence her behavior directly, which is still driven by physical brain processes. But it does represent a new kind of knowledge that is not physical. Jackson's thought experiment and the idea of epiphenomenal qualia lead to several significant philosophical insights, especially concerning the non-materialistic aspects of consciousness. Jackson's thought experiment is thus, at best, can be seen as a classic example of the knowledge argument against physicalism. The idea is that no amount of physical knowledge about the brain and perception can fully explain the subjective experience qualia of seeing colors, hearing sounds, feeling emotions, and so on. This suggests that physicalism, while it might explain how the brain works, cannot fully account for what it feels like to be conscious. Consciousness involves more than just physical facts. So, Jackson's argument supports the idea of the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is a recurring theme, more so when we discuss the non-materialistic account of mind. It's a term coined by the philosopher David Chalmers. The hard problem refers to the difficulty of explaining why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experiences or qualia. Epiphenomenal qualia emphasizes that even if we know how the brain processes information, the easy problem of consciousness, we still cannot explain why those processes are accompanied by qualitative experiences, the hard problem. Jackson's argument implies a form of property dualism. While he does not argue for substance dualism, the idea that the mind and body are made of different substances, he suggests that mental properties, qualia, are distinct from physical properties. This challenges the physicalist assumption that everything about the mind can be reduced to brain states. Property dualism allows for the brain to produce qualia but insists that these qualia are fundamentally non-physical and epiphenomenal without causal power. The concept of epiphenomenal qualia emphasizes the non-materialistic aspects of consciousness. It suggests that conscious experience, while dependent on brain activity, cannot be explained solely by the material or physical properties of the brain. This raises deep questions about the nature of subjective experience and whether it can ever be fully understood through the lens of neuroscience or physical science. Criticisms and reconsideration. Dennett's response. Daniel Dennett and other physicalist philosophers argue that Jackson's thought experiment relies on intuition that is misleading. They suggest that if Mary truly knew all the physical facts, she would be able to predict what the experience of red would be like. In Dennett's view, there is no need for an appeal to non-physical qualia. Reconsideration by Jackson. Interestingly, Jackson later retracted his argument, agreeing with Dennett that physical knowledge could, in principle, explain everything about consciousness. However, the argument continues to be influential in debates about the nature of consciousness. The distinctions between qualia and epiphenomenal qualia highlights the debate over the causal role of subjective experience in consciousness. Jackson's What Mary Did Not Know thought experiment supports the idea that qualia are non-physical and epiphenomenal, presenting a challenge to physicalism. It raises important philosophical questions about the limits of materialism, the hard problem of consciousness, and whether the subjective aspects of experience can ever be fully explained by physical science. Now, the concepts of Robo-Mary and what Mary did not know are the further counter examples that have been postulated, and we will soon see and discuss in our next segment how what Mary did not know has been challenged by Dennett with his thought experiment with Robo-Mary. Thank you so much.